Any questions? I know I've thrown a lot of factoids out here. Somebody want to go back to the pictures, please?
My name is Ruth Baker, and I am president of NAPO. We've taken over the television studio at 28 Lancaster Avenue. The concern that I have is something I saw a couple of years ago, and that was coming out of Asia, where they were using robotics and computer technology to run the ports. And that made my concern for the people working at the ports become heightened. You're talking about the future, and I'm wondering in this scenario whether or not we can ensure that that kind of robotic and technology does not, in essence, take away from, instead of augmenting, if you will, the jobs and the job aspects. I think that needs to be addressed. The other question that I have is, do you have these things in writing? I mean, do you have handouts that we could use? But I think this computer technology and robotics should be addressed. Thank you very much.
That is super question. Just a great question, because what you say is right. In a lot of other places in the world, they're going to manless applications, totally automated, that are done without people and interface. And particularly in Europe, we've seen it in Asia. That's not the case here at all. What we're, and let's go back if we could, how do we go backwards? Let's go back to one of the pictures of the cranes. And I'll just give you a quick answer to what we're thinking about. So, are we using high technology? The latest. Is it automated? No. Meaning it is not manless. So what we're doing is, there's not people walking around here anymore because they're on the other side of the stack, the safe side, where delivery is being made. These cranes are actually being operated by folks who are not in them, but they're in what we call a kitchen, and they're doing the video games in a safe and secure environment. Again, my colleague just has come off a few years of implementing that. They just started it in Newark, New Jersey. So the idea is not to eliminate jobs through automation. It's in fact all about making it safer, because when you have 8 cranes taking 35 containers an hour off, you have 8 cranes working at that, and then you have another 35 cranes behind that supporting those movements. You can't have people running around and driving trucks the way you do today. Next question. Wow. All right, let's go. Somebody else pick. Phil, you pick who it is.
Right.
You have a second mic?
You got it. Just want to say.
My name is Ted Magnuson. I'm from the city of Newcastle. We have a small town. We have had large rumors from everything for this port going to be built on Battery Park and everything else. Now, the problem is that half of the people in Newcastle actually don't know where this project is going to be built. They're not familiar with the city lines. Is it possible that we could get some copies of this so that we'll be able to show our townspeople and explain to them exactly what's going on? Because there's a tremendous amount of rumors that are around our town, and they just get bigger every day. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll take care
So to answer that question, yeah, we will put a package after today's session. We will put a link on the Newcastle website, and it'll allow you to print some of these same illustrations. It'll give you the, so I would guesstimate that somewhere no later than the middle of next week, you'll be able to access it via the internet.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Catherine Dalbani. I'm asking a question as a taxpayer. I haven't heard, how much is this project going to cost? Who's going to pay for it? What happens if it goes belly up? I'm thinking about our casinos, where you had to pay $10 million to bail it out. I've heard an estimate, it was printed in the News Journal a couple months ago, it was gonna be between $400 million to $600 million for phase one. I'm not sure who would pay for that, but if we're gonna create 4,000 jobs, and it's gonna go belly up with 400 to 600 million, we can just write checks to 4,000 people for 100,000 to 150,000. And one last comment, I know I'm not throwing a lot of questions at you. If the property is owned, I believe, by an Asian company that Mr. Gordon stated, why pass it through, you were talking about the 3 Ps, to private, to the government? Why don't, you know, if all these goods are gonna come from Asia anyway, that's where our manufacturing jobs have gone, why don't they just transfer it to the state for no fee?
A lot of good questions there. I did mention the cost of the person, but let's do that. Okay, so a lot of good questions. The project first phase is about 400 to 600 million. That all of that is privately funded. So it's those private stakeholders who are going to belly up to the bar and say, I'm going to give you a 400 or 500 million, let's call it $500 million project. And in return, what do I want from the public agency? Well, I want you to own the land, and I'll tell you why. That's a real good question. And I'll get there when I get my computer. Can you? Okay, so let's stay on this one. I'll answer it. The way the government works in their dredging programs, and specifically in what was just done in what's known as WRDA 2014, which is basically gives the money to the Corps of Engineers to do the projects that they have to do. The private folks are going to do this dredging the first time. But if the land stays in the public domain, in the future, that dredging requirement is federalized. It becomes part of the overall dredging program. And it gets picked up by the Army Corps of Engineers if the land stays in the public domain. So that's a very important criteria for potential investors. They want to switch the land back. And I know it's a bit confusing when we got into that diagram where how a potential transaction could work. So it starts out as a private landholder, and he may or may not, or maybe he gets in business with these other private people, and they're investment firms, and they come together and they go to the public agency and they say, somehow we want to flip the land piece back to a public agency. Either you pay us, or we pay you on a per container basis, or we take a mortgage over the next 30 years. Whatever that number is, it's rolled up into the transaction. It's not an expenditure to begin with. So there's no public dollars during this process. There's only a potential for public dollars after they've got to this point. Some of what we put here as the financial platform is in the future. If you have somebody like Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley guaranteeing this project, in other words, they're going to guarantee the $400 million. What they're looking for in return is, besides funneling that $400 million through their coffers on the front end or the left end, they want to sell bonds to it in the future on the right hand. So if you have the state step up and give a tax-free status to those bonds, the state's making money, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, or somebody else is making money, and it's guaranteed dollars. That's what these private stakeholder parties want from the state. They don't necessarily want hard dollars, they want soft dollars. So that they'll securitize this whole process. The 4,000 jobs, I don't know where that came from. I saw it this morning. This is the first time I saw it. I have no idea where, there's a lot more jobs than 4,000 jobs.
That came from me, I was just being very, very conservative. I didn't want to scare people.
Well, I was gonna compliment Tomoko because 8 or 9 years ago, when I first started dealing with them on a regular basis, it was the dredging project. I knew him previous to that, but he has really got to be applauded in terms of, he has made the transition from student to master to professor in this industry. Until that 4,000 number. I don't know where that is. That has nothing to do with us, I say that. It's a lot more than that. But he has really come along, understands the issues, and is a great source. He has done a phenomenal job of his learning curve and should be used by folks that know him, folks that are in the neighborhood. He is really a very, very good source. Don't ask him about how many. Next question.
Mike, thank you. Oh, thank you. Go ahead. Go ahead, Mike. The two major concerns I have in coastal zone and dredging. How do you overcome those obstacles?
Yeah, there absolutely is a something that has to be done. I think the skin in the game that the private investors are looking for is that from a coastal zone management standpoint, the public offices are going to facilitate that regulatory process. That they're going to jump in and be in lockstep and push it through. There's issues you have to deal with. There's no doubt there's going to be environmental concerns. We think we're planning it with the latest view of that. We're taking into account wetlands, and, as I said, noise pollution, light pollution, sediment. If we go to the dredging, specifically, what piece are you talking about?
Any and all?
Oh, okay. So dredging is it's paid for by the private parties the first time around, right? The private parties are going to pay for it the first time around.
I'm sorry to clarify that. I'm not talking about who's paying for it. How do you get it dredged, and where do you take what you've taken out? Where do you put it?
Yeah, okay, so sediment is the same, if we go back to the chart explains, the sediment is the same as the river. Our assumptions, we haven't taken any type of borings or anything like that for this particular piece. We're assuming that the characteristics here are the same as the ones here. So there's two places. They're either going to go to that site that's right next to the existing Valley State Port Corporation today, or they're going to go right in here. But we don't anticipate any type of hazardous or different composition than what you're already digging up. So environmentally, if it's approved for here, they're going to have a really tough time not approving it for here, unless they find something that we don't know about.
JJ.
Next question.
I'll come to you next, Gary.
Thank you. The existing port is my representative district. The area you're talking about now was my representative district, let's be redistrict that. That is is currently an industrial park, the River's Edge Industrial Park. And there is industry in there now. Actually, there is a company called the Greenfield Recovery Technology, LLC, has an application into the coastal zone to build a location there to recycle poultry waste. And I think this is a much better operation.
I know so.
It has a much better effect on my district. But having said that, have you been approached, or have you approached the current industry in that River's Edge Industrial Park?
No, we haven't had any direct dialogue. Wait, here's what's attractive from a port planning standpoint, as you know, purely professional. This campus setting is aesthetically pleasing, and that's the idea that we're thinking, is that we buffer this with knolls and trees and all of that, and lead from the street to the industrial real estate section as it exists today to the port complex, which is in a formal form also viewed as industrial real estate. But we have not talked to any of the neighbors. We like the idea of the way it slopes down to the water. We like the way it's configured already with the buildings and that campus-like setting that's behind there. And then it leads into more industry and more actual hard facilities. And then it can transition very well into a port application, but we have not spoken to the neighbors.
Gary?
Thank you, and I'd like to thank you for this effort, especially the county executive and anybody involved. I'm Gary Warren, President of Delaware Farm Bureau. JJ, you be careful how you talk about that poker manure. I just recently visited a grain export facility in Louisiana, and the area down there, they told us that there were 100,000 plus job openings. This industry ships 70% of the nation's grain out of those ports. The facility we visited was clean as a whistle. They collected all of the dust and pelletized the dust and sold that back to the industry. And when you look at your map, it was pretty interesting to me that you showed the Chicago area as the receiver of all of these goods. But I can tell you right now, if you build this port and build it properly, it'll be the receiver of a big percentage of your Midwest grain. I was just on the phone on a conference call with the president of American Farm Bureau last week, and the Illinois president of Farm Bureau says we have a bumper crop and we're having problems with our shipping. Our barge fees have gotten so high, it's backed up, we can't depend on the rail, and it was just on and on and on. And our prices have dropped so that they really can't afford to pay the shipping on a lot of this grain. And we're closer to anything between Chicago and here to what Chicago is from New Orleans. So my point of this is that nobody's made an effort to bring some of that grain and ship it out. And wasn't too many years ago, there were hundreds of train cars, the rail cars that came from Canada down just to take care of our poultry industry. So we're already moving this grain by rail, we're already doing it, and I think it would be a real boon, not only to the local economy, but this has a big regional effect, and anything that has a positive impact on agriculture, I think the Delaware Farm Bureau and American Farm Bureau is going to be all for it. I asked Bob Stallman on that call if we put a port, or if we improve our port in Delaware, would that help some of the situation? And his indication is that our infrastructure in this country has not been properly maintained, and we're falling behind the times, and anything we can do to improve our infrastructure is an improvement to agriculture. In the next, by 2050, we have to double our production to feed the world, and we're losing the shipping on most of our production now. Thank you very much for doing this.
Here, wait, let me just answer that. Great. The point he brings up is absolutely the case. So we're importing all these TVs and Game Boys and whatever from Asia. So we have to match cargo back to Asia. And the economics say if you bring a loaded container in, you want to bring a loaded container out. And I think what you're suggesting, which is a real solution, is that you put grain products within the containers instead of floating them down barges in the Mississippi. Absolutely has potential. It's being done as quick as you could describe it, particularly in Canada, where I don't have it on the map, but today they're already doing it in Canada. And they're doing it because there are no barges that can run on a reliable basis up and down the Mississippi, because that infrastructure is constrained. Either the water, the dredging, they can't get the supply, so the supply is to containers. And as you mentioned, you are the closest port. One last thing about the economics. So we do these studies all over the world, up and down the coast. And let's talk about the Delaware River economics. This is the part that I know why Philadelphia is growing 29% in a year. It's because the lowest cost to move a container through a container terminal, hands down, is on the Delaware River, particularly in Wilmington, but it extends its way up to Philadelphia as well. I've said it for the last 15 years. You're only now starting to benefit from the shipping public recognizing it, because there's so many problems in New York, Norfolk, and Baltimore. Last winter, it took 7 days to get a container out of a terminal in New York, New Jersey. It took a week from when you discharged it off the vessel to when that container rolled out the gate. It was 7 days. It happens here week in and week out in a matter of hours. That's why you can grow to the level that we forecast here. That's why you have people who are willing to put $500 million of their own dollars into it to get into the game.
I'm coming to that.
Just a question on the height of the bridge. Do you anticipate that being any kind of restriction or advantage at this time, and if so, why?
And I'll be right back. Let me ask you a question also, and I'm ready to act.
Go ahead and answer the question.
This has been a great presentation. Thanks so much. My name is Vince McIntosh, and I export now a product out of New York, to some extent, and Los Angeles. Best case scenario, when you see the first container load of products made in Delaware, you put on a ship outbound.
Okay, so I'll answer the second one first. That's why we're here today. This is the start of a collective process about bringing together all the stakeholders, not just the investors and the terminal operators, but it's the citizenry. That's what's going to make this happen. That's who's going to be able to facilitate the regulatory process. So if all things were on a piece of paper in theory, and we could pull together the investors and look at it, you're looking at 36 months if things go well. If we start to get in the doldrums because of whatever, finances, regulatory, it's just going to extend it from there. In terms of the bridge is really not an issue because the ships don't have to go underneath it. And in terms of navigation, they're not in any way under current navigational or Coast Guard rule. They wouldn't be impacted. But in other words, they wouldn't have to seek permission to berth due to proximity. That wouldn't be affected.
I think what he's asking more or less is, with the air draft, the ships that this berth that we're trying to get together here, ships don't have to go on the bridge as far as air draft, so it saves the shipper the cost of going on the bridges and the turnaround time, so you don't have any air draft.
Yeah, okay, so maybe I misunderstood. So
Well, the question is really this. For example, if they're going to drop cargo here on the south side of the bridge and pick it up, could they also pick up cargoes on the north side of the bridge? Do you envision that the same ships would be able to go north of the bridge and then go back and use this terminal as opposed to maybe one stop in Delaware, multiple stops potentially?
yeah, under a likely operating scenario, would not make two stops. They would, I'm sorry. Yeah, it would be a different application, different market. You're going to go here as one-stop shopping, and here let's talk about the future down the state. It's going to be to a specialized carrier like the Doles and the Conchitas of the world, the smaller niche players that don't have as big a vessel, unless you so choose as Diamond State Port Corporation or the public agency to transition it over to the new facility. But the beauty of this and why it gets so much attention, this public-private partnership, why it's so different than what you went through with Kinder Morgan 2 years ago. It's night and day. It's because you're driving the bus. You make the decision. Do these public parties, this private enterprise, do they pass our litmus test? Whatever it is, financial, regulatory. Same thing with how you use the asset in the future. It's you're the one, the people, the public office is making the choice as to how these assets are used now and in the future.
I'd like to recognize the presence of U.S. Congressman John Carney.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your presentation. My name is Vincent O'Shea. I'm the business representative for the operating engineers. Couple of questions, a couple of points I want to bring up. Like you said, it's going to create a tremendous amount of jobs for people that really need it in this state, in this city. Something that hasn't been brought up is what it's going to put back into our tax infrastructure. I don't know if you have that estimation of that or not. Which would greatly help us, the taxpayers now, because without these jobs, and we're getting a reputation of Delaware not being business friendly, that's starting to happen. Because of opposition out there, the NIMBYs don't want to build in their backyard or whatever. We need these jobs. And with that tax infrastructure and financial, it makes it easier on the rest of us instead of our leadership in politic end of the world. To increase those taxes on those who are left here trying to make things work for Delaware. And I'd like to know when the possible start date, if the stars and the moons lines up correctly, and if you're forcing any of that opposition to go away, if you have any plan for that. Thank you.
Keep it in mind, I got one more right here and then.
The rendering you showed had one ship at the end of the dock. Is that the whole plan is one ship at a time, or will there be multiple ships?
Yeah, it's multiple. Depending on the size of the ship, you do 2 or 3, 4 for the first phase. All right, as you should, good job. So again, second question. Yeah, the rendering only showed one. It's depending on the length overall of the vessel, but the first phase could, in theory, take 4 of the current and planned vessels against the berth at the same time. So ultimately, we're looking at 800,000 TEUs of capacity. And it all depends on how long you keep it on the terminal. Meaning, as soon as you get it off, you get an empty slot to put something new on. The first question, sun and moon, everything lines up, shovel in the ground. That's a tough one. We're upwards of 12 months if everything lined up. It's more of a regulatory issue. I think you'll see the money is not an issue. I think you're going to be shocked, but the money is not an issue. It's lining up the stakeholders. But as Bill mentioned, there's more money that they have a fiduciary responsibility to invest. Ontario Teachers has to invest over $1 billion a year in their infrastructure fund by law. It's Canadian law, but it is what it is. So back to the tax rate. I don't know enough about the specifics on what this would generate relative to taxes. I'll just tell you this. Hands down, the maritime industry is the greatest producer or impact against generation of state, local, and federal taxes versus any other industry. Just because of the valuation of the cargo. The average container, each one of these containers that was on that screen, the average value of it is about $450,000. It could be shoes, it could be TVs, it could be foodstuffs, alcohol. If you take a cross section, the street value of it is $450,000. Someone's paying tax on that, and every single one. All right, so somebody has pointed out, let's take a look at Savannah. Savannah has 2.5, 2.6 million, or whatever, 2.9 million TEUs. Their state taxes are 1.4 billion from the port. The local taxes are 1.1 billion, and the federal taxes are 4.5 billion. And again, it's because the value of the cargo that's moving through the facility.
I also like to make a comment. We're looking at this chart right now, and you see Savannah and Charleston. They're not much different than Wilmington and Philadelphia, geographic region right now. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, they were very small ports in small cities. And if you look at that chart right now, you see the number of jobs and the income that they're producing in Savannah and Charleston. It could be the same thing here, when they have a cooperation between the state and private sector, and unions and labor and everyone else, and those ports are booming. If you ever get a chance to visit, you will see Savannah. Their river is half the size of our river. The ships can't even turn around. They go up the river one time a day, then they wait and come back the other way. That's how busy they are, because the river is too narrow to turn around. We have a great river here. And another thing that Ed said earlier about our heritage here, our birthright. This river is our birthright. Wilmington and Philadelphia exist because of the river. The people from Europe came here because the Delaware River gave them access into the interior of the country, and it still does. People look to banking and other industries today, but the river is why we're here, and the river is why we should stay here.
Woody's teeing something up. I'm just going to bring it to me personally. So we do this all over the world, and I saved this. I wasn't going to show it, but I'm going to do it now after that comment. So my oldest guy, proud parent moment, got his license. Now he's driving a tug and barge up the Delaware River, and we had a little celebration about a year ago with the ILA office in Philadelphia, cake and coffee. Don't ask me how many pieces of boys he had, I'm not telling. But the point here is I got a younger one that's following him, hopefully, God willing, in the Merchant Marine Academy next year. The take-home message, this is my home port. I have two numbers in this that I want to grow. They're very close to me. Besides the tens of thousands that we should be, this is home plate for me, this river. So I am vested in this one. I do it all over the world, but I'm behind making this work, just like hopefully you will be. Please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Muhammad Salam. I'm a community activist as well as a union person and a citizen in the city of Wilmington as well in the state of Delaware. I moved from Wilmington after giving them 30 years to Newark, Delaware, but also involved in how we would stimulate the economy for the jobs for these youth out in the community. One thing you have brought up, and this survey should be crystal clear for everyone. Hopefully there may be some copies out, so whatever doubt you may have in your mind, you can rest assured or get with someone who may be knowledgeable of what we deal about economic, finance, and everything else. How many is a board in support of this? And what do we have to do to gain or to get support for those who, to buy into this concept? I think that's very, very important at this point. Also, key questions should be asked each and every one of us. This is a reality check as far as economics and jobs. This is not a political platform for people to take advantage and use as a leverage in our community. This should be over now. We all suffering economically, jobless, and everything else. But we know this going to come into play. Me as a community activist, I know it's going to come into play. So how can we offset this political things that are taking place where we're going to try to use this stuff as a leverage and try to vie once against each other and to gain power? 25 years ago, the city of Wilmington, 27 years ago, the city of Wilmington owned the dock. What you talked about, the shareholders, the partners and all that, that was done. We got to undo what was done and not allow ourselves to be ignorant to the process anymore. And not allow gatekeepers to come in and to politicalize their position and power to manipulate us. Thank you.
So, and you're gonna bring all the folks together, that's why we're here today, is to give you the information. If you have the questions, come forward, we encourage that. We'll make this available on the link.
Just to look at other entities. On a given day.
Take the mic.
On a given day when the port's open, how many truckers will it be?
Yeah, from day one, it's, truckers are about 600 a day, new truckers required. When it starts to go through into year 2, that's about 1,600. We are building it for 5,000 truck moves a day. That's all new jobs.
And how about the distributions that are working 24/7? How many jobs?
Oh, I couldn't even begin to say, it's more than your 4,000. I'll tell you that right now. Just in that place alone, just in GM alone, it's more than 4,000.
I'll be right to you next.
Herman Holloway Jr., Executive Director of the Martin Luther King Center since 1974. I wonder why I'm still there, but there I am. I wear a couple different hats. One of those is Chairman of the Wilmington Housing Authority Board of Commissioners. I started not to say anything, and I guess my first comment is going to be that I want to commend County Executive Gordon, Brother Kamoko, and all those locally that saw fit to unite, share this information, and begin to reach out to others all in and around, and you, sir, and your team and others. And what's being presented here appears to be something that is absolutely needed and necessary to be able to go forward and to create employment and be able to sustain with affordable, livable wages and whatnot, so that we can really get our economy moving again. The thing that I rise to say, which is I think is the most important point, as I hear this thing about public-private partnerships. Public-private partnerships. That can be the best thing since high-button shoes, and it can be a disaster. And the only way in which it's going to work is that all parties involved be at the playing field, be at the table at the same time, and have input and understand exactly what's going on. The reason for which I mentioned Wilmington Housing Authority. We're now involved in public partnerships with some developers and some investors with 3 of our high-rises. One to do Lincoln Tower and so intermingled and all kinds of problems, and we agreed to guarantee no interest bonds at state level and all that, going along with all this stuff. And we got a mess. We got a mess over at the Parkview apartment when we left and HUD allowed us to go into public-private partnership with some of our buildings. And another situation now that I didn't know anything about until a couple months ago, over at the Crestview when it burned up and we had to rebuild it, didn't have the money, HUD wouldn't give us the money, we had to go public-private. So all I'm saying, everybody here, to the elected officials and everybody that's going to be a part of this, make sure that everyone is at the table at the same time as this begins to take shape. And I feel all respect and concerns addressed. I feel it can be a win-win.
Ed, if I may, and Mr. Holloway, I'll say this, and then Ed can elaborate if you choose to. We have a master contract in place. That master contract, and there's language you put in there, any new facility where it's container work, the ILA have exclusive jurisdiction to that terminal. No one can bring not one box in or off a ship without the ILA doing it. So that part you don't have to worry about. And we are going to be at the table when anything is taking place as far as a private partnership.
I'll just add that the process, you know, we're protecting those people that need to be at the table, because ultimately the public office has the ability to say yea or nay to the private parties.
Hi, Jeff Flynn, City of Wilmington. Did you mention the projected TEUs in year one? If you did, I apologize. Can you restate them?
Yeah, no, I didn't. And in year one, since 2016, it 80,000.
So the ramp up now that we're looking at with the private investors, and that's just what we're doing. We're doing the due diligence and what they call the book. So the hurdle rates, and your question of what the volume is. First year, we're assuming it's going to be between 60 and 80,000. We are not reallocating a single container that is on the Delaware River today. We haven't said cargo that's at Diamond State gets transferred over. Cargo that's in Philadelphia gets transferred over. Essentially, it will be at capacity, or could be at capacity, in 5 years with 4 unique services. And those services today are only slightly larger than what's already being called at Diamond State Port Corporation. So if we took one service from New York, one from, well, let's say we take 2 services from New York, one from Baltimore and one from Norfolk, we're at our 800,000. What is so attractive to the investors, the private investors, about this opportunity is this. They call it hurdle rate. What is it required of the market to be at 100% utilization? It's about 5 or 6 points. So it's not like we're saying you have to go out and penetrate a market of 15 or 30. The market here penetration, 4, 5, 6 points, we're at full capacity. And we're keeping all the cargo that we have.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
My name is Darrell Brady. I was going to ask, when you was talking about the Easy Pass setup, is that going to be like what happened with cash registers? When you had a bunch of cashiers, and then it was condensed to one person overseeing several cashiers at the self-checkout. But I see that the gentleman here spoke on 600 truck drivers, and then that's going to take a lot more than one person overseeing. So that really answers my question. In addition to that, the fruit ships, are they going to go from being as palletized as they are now to being also containers?
Yeah, I think so. I think we just ignore it. Almost all of it goes in containers.
When you talk to most of the employees, most of the Chilean fruit that we get there, at some point, they're gonna put it in all containers. It's much cheaper to ship it in a container than it is to open it as a break off, because the refrigeration life is longer if they set the temperature at the boxes, and they just stay until they need, wherever they need to go to.
I just wanted to know, is it gonna be just a dry box facility, or is it gonna be a reefer facility too?
Okay, so the question is, what kind of containers will be handled? It's both. It's whatever is required of the market. So they're refrigerated as well as dry boxes. Anything else?